Women of Wyoming Then and Now is brought to you by the Wyoming Historical Society and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This program features unique female perspectives on events, themes, or narratives related to state history. We, the host, believe that one woman's action toward a better future can result in a greater legacy that inspires and equips many generations of women to come. Welcome to Women of Wyoming Then and Now. I'm today's host, Janelle Maloney, an author and historian. And with me today as my co-host is Sylvia Bruner.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Bruner, and I am the director at the Jim Gatchell Memorial Museum in Buffalo, Wyoming, and am a lifelong history nerd.
Me too. And I'm honored to introduce our special guest today is Nancy Curtis. She is the founder of High Plains Press, a book publisher in Glendo, Wyoming, that particularly publishes items of significance to the American West, especially books about Wyoming. She is a recipient of the prestigious Governor Arts Award and the coveted Lariat Award from Western Writers of America. We're incredibly honored to have you here to talk about your contribution to Wyoming state history and the way that you've impacted women here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. So let's get on with the show.
That sounds good to me. Well, Nancy, you and I have talked before this interview, and I have been completely enamored with the way that you operate your business as a small press to make sure that women are prominent in employment and prominent in the books that you're choosing to publish. Can you, for our viewers, talk a little bit about how you established the business to be just that?
I knew a lot of writers who were writing things that were too local or too regional to interest bigger presses. Even the University of Nebraska or the University of Oklahoma said, yeah, we think this is interesting. We think we could sell some of these, but there aren't enough people in Wyoming to make a book a profitable thing. Maybe you ought to go to a museum or Union Pacific or someone and get a grant, and it would help. So I knew a couple of small presses in Wyoming, and they were both undergoing transitions and moving from the state. So I thought, well, this might be a good time for me just to try to see if I could publish books. So I was always a little hesitant to say that I'm a publisher. You know, what makes you a publisher? And I like certificates and things that give me real clout. So I went to the University of Denver Publishing Institute. I got my certificate. I'm still kind of hesitant to say I was a publisher, but I started publishing books.
For our viewers, what percentage of employees are women?
I've recently retired, so I only had one employee, and I could hire freelance editors or indexers, and what percentage were, well, the one employee was always a woman. and women, there are a lot of women who do freelance work in book publishing because I think it offers them the opportunity to be flexible. What percentage of the authors were women, I've never figured that out. And one time I was introduced to somebody, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're that person who publishes those books about women in the West." And I'd never thought of it that way. And so I started paying more attention. And you know, women are everywhere. So it's hard to publish a book that doesn't have women in it. So when you publish a book, when we published a book about Tom Horn, you know, there's an important woman in that story, Gwendolyn Kimmel. And when we published a book about Butch Cassidy, there's At a Place. And so some books are about women. There's Esther Morris, and there's books that are just particularly biographies about one woman, or books about groups of women. Like we've done one about the military laundresses,
Mm-hmm.
who were pretty much all women. But we never set out to just publish women. And I'm interested in women, and there's a lot of untold stories there.
I wonder what makes High Plains Press so attractive to female authors. There's something magical about it. I don't know if it's just a cultural thing or the way that you interact with your authors or the belief you have in them, but it's definitely remarkable. And from what I hear, you are an author yourself. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I started out as an author, out of college. Wyoming Writers was a big influence on me. I went to the first, I think, Wyoming Writers Workshop and met a lot of other writers. So I've always thought of myself in a way of as an author. And maybe that's inviting to other authors then to approach me. And then I don't know if you're asking about the books that I've co-edited. Two other women and I used to get together and talk about all the good women's stories there were out there. We talked about a lot about ranch women's stories or stories of women who work on the land. And Gaydel Collier from Sundance and Linda Hazelstrom from Hermosa, South Dakota. And so around 2000, well, probably in the 1990s, we decided to gather stories, contemporary stories written by the women themselves, and see if we could put together a book, which eventually the first one became Leaning into the Wind.
I wonder, do you have a particular passage from one of those books that would be fun to share with our viewers?
I'll read you a little piece by a Colorado writer named Farm Wife with an Attitude.
Oh,
This is kind of where we were coming from. She says, whenever I fill out a form that asks me to list my occupation, I put down farmer, the same word I use when I'm asked my husband's occupation. The following is a true story. The man reading the form says, your husband is a farmer. Yes, my husband and I are farmers, I reply. You don't have a job. Yes, I have a job. I'm a farmer. I mean, you don't work outside the home. Well, actually, quite a lot of farming is done outside. I mean, you don't work for anyone else. No, I don't work for anyone else. So you're a housewife, or would you prefer farm wife? He's getting ready to change the word farmer on the form. I tell him, Ted and I are farmers, and I'm a wife and he's a husband. If you insist that I am just a farm wife, then he is just a farm husband. The fact that I'm the wife and he's the husband has nothing to do with the occupation. We are farmers. So we kind of started with that attitude that we needed to hear more about what women were really doing out here, that there were women who were working, making a living from the land. And then we progressed. We got smarter too. So.
I love that selection. Which book did that one come from?
That's from Leaning into the Wind, which was the first book and has the most stories. I think there's 205 pieces in the book from different women, all telling their own stories, which was kind of hard for some women. They wanted to tell you about Uncle Fred and what an interesting character he was. But what we wanted was to hear their stories. Everybody always says, I wish I'd started interviewing 20 years ago and got this account or that account. And so we wanted to do that, get the jump on them and get the contemporary accounts and get them down on paper now.
What a treasure not only for any interested reader, but for their family members as well. Because you're right, so many people, but especially women, I think, are always willing to share about other people's stories. And for you to have given them the place to capture their own story in their own words, that's pretty amazing.
It was, you'd go to the mailbox and get a bunch of pieces, and we eventually ended up with 2 stacks about 6 feet tall of different pieces of writing. And some women sent us, their egg log from 1930, how many eggs they gathered each day. And one woman sent things almost every day about her life around Pinedale. And she worked with Frank Lloyd Wright at one point. And so it was great fun to go to the post office and bring home the envelopes and open them up and see what was there. Oh, I brought a poem from Leaning into the Wind that my husband came in he called, I guess, and he said, I'm listening to the governor's inauguration, and I just heard a poem from your book, and
Wow.
Leaning into the Wind on the radio, and
What an honor.
governor read it. So then I called the author, and she didn't know either, so we were all amazed. But it's called Transplanted. And really, all of us in Wyoming or our families started at transplants at one time or another. This is by Midge Farmer, whose official name was Patricia Farmer. If I had not come to these high plains, my heart would have missed the beat of this love of place. My guts would have yearned for some unknown fulfillment. My mind would have shrunk to a small civilized size, and my soul would have tentacles, searching, always reaching out for what I found here. But I am now like the tenacious sage, wide roots forced into this seldom yielding ground to make a place for me, to hold on tight, to nurture and be nourished. And oh, this land does feed me.
I like that. We have sage here on the mountain that I live at the base of, and it grows wherever it wants to. And I thought it's so beautiful in the spring. So there were little buds, little ones coming out. So I dug it up and I put it in my backyard, and all of them immediately died. And I'm like, how is it that you grow in the rockiest, most severe conditions with no water? And I bring you into this wonderful place where you'll have a caretaker, and you immediately say, nope.
Indian paintbrush is almost impossible to transplant, which is why we don't have it in our gardens very often, because it has a symbiotic relationship with sage and sage roots. And that's always fascinated me, that even sage has friends.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a tip for a researcher on how to convince somebody that their story is worth sharing?
Ooh, good question.
Ooh, and a hard question. No, but I think we talked to them about, we wanted authentic stories. We weren't particularly interested in polished stories or stories with the best grammar, or that everything was spelled right and every comma was in the right place. We wanted to hear authenticity in the stories. Some women wrote, had one great story that maybe they told their grandkids and maybe they didn't, but we wanted to hear that. Yeah. I think as we sensed that we could tell that the women were speaking their own stories, I think maybe they could sense that we understood and knew the life, that we weren't. Well, one thing we used sometime, it was at a time when people from the East Coast were coming and kind of dropping in on Wyoming and writing about what it was like to live in Gillette, or what the oil industry was doing to the environment. And then they'd go away and they'd never come back.
Mm.
And we called those parachute riders, parachuted in, disappeared. And because of our backgrounds, they can tell that we weren't parachute riders. We were here.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and maybe your authentic Wyoming experience?
My family owns a ranch here in Wyoming, and I've worked as I've fed cows in the morning. Sometimes I've worked at what needed to be done. If income was needed, I worked as a boat marketing person for a while. I can pull a calf and bottle feed a calf and those things. And my co-editors also had experiences. Gaydell Collier, who has since passed away, was from the East Coast but had come west, and she lived more of a homestead lifestyle, and cooked on a wood cook stove. And we made some videos of her baking bread. And Glenda Hazelstrom is known more as a writer, but she's always lived on a ranch too, and taught in schools, working for arts councils and things. So
There's definitely that genuineness. And I can see why authors really want to work with you. They believe you know what you're talking about, and you know the value that their stories can provide to readers. You know the smell of the manure and the crunch of the grass in the summer and all of those things. These stories are alive to this demographic, and we don't want someone to put it in a can. They're wild on purpose. You mentioned that you are looking at retirement. So as you step away from recording, preserving, and promoting these incredible stories, what is a legacy that you want to leave behind? Like, what do you hope happens now with High Plains Press or with book publishers in general? What do you hope for that legacy to be?
Well, as far as High Plains Press goes, I guess sometimes you see authors or publishers, standing in front of their bookshelf and they say, well, these are all my mysteries. This is the series with this author. And so when I stand in front of books that I published, I think, well, many of these books wouldn't have been in print without me. And I hope to add value to the books, and by careful editing and making them as professional as I can. So what High Plains Press has, we could get back to the word authentic again. I recognize some things about Wyoming that a publisher even in Nebraska or Oklahoma might not recognize. And one of our best-selling books is Steamboat, Legendary Bucking Horse, which is about the bucking horse on the Wyoming logo and the University of Wyoming logo, and even High Plains Press's logo. And not everybody knows why there should be a book about this horse, or why anybody would want to buy a book about this horse that they hauled around to rodeos and people tried to ride him till he stopped. And but those of us who have been here in Wyoming understand the curiosity about the horse and the kind of magnetism of, if you walk down the mall in Texas wearing your cowboy cap with the bucking horse on it, people will say, "Hey, Wyoming," and they recognize that it's a symbol of Wyoming. So we knew that if we published the book that told the story of the bucking horse, that that many people in Wyoming would buy it, and that many tourists are just fascinated with what's that on the license tag, you know? Why do you have this horse all over? And so it would be a continual bestseller.
I was just wondering, the logistics of operating a press like this. It's, mind-boggling to somebody like me who's not been intimately involved in it. So what you just said is really fascinating, that you need a couple of titles that constantly sell around 200 copies a year. What's your clue when you're reviewing a manuscript or talking to an author? Have you ever had that kind of aha moment of like, this is the title I want because I think it's going to be successful? What tips you off to that?
Well, when I first started publishing, I think I didn't realize how much Wyoming people related to their history. Our history is pretty short compared to other countries or even other states. But then I realized that history, Wyoming people love their history. So, it's hard to sell a book too. One thing I had to think of as a micro publisher is how to make enough money from the first book to pay for another book and another book. And sooner or later, you're going to have one that doesn't sell very well. And then you need one that sells twice as good to keep going. And so it's hard to sell a book about a subject or a person that nobody's ever heard of. And there are certainly a lot of people that you've heard of, but like a book that can say Tom Horn or Butch Cassidy is going to sell a lot, and maybe allow us to publish some books about military laundresses that nobody really knows that they want to know about military laundresses.
Nancy, I'm sure in all your years since 1984, gosh, you've been doing this longer than I've been alive. I'm sure you've seen every subject that can possibly be written about. You've seen it all. But what is something that you wish would appear more in literature?
Right now, I have some little piles where I put things, like this would be good in a collection sometime. There's not enough information here for a whole book, but this is an awfully good story. The women's school teacher between Cheyenne and Chugwater who ran into the burning school and saved the kids, but died in the process. We need to know about her.
Yeah.
And kids need to know about her. And so one of those places where I stack things are women's stories that should be told.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm just kind of doing whatever I want to do, maybe I can do some of those.
Well, Nancy, you've shared a lot of wonderful advice for us today, and I'm sure that right now we can access a lot of other good advice on the internet, other stories of other women who have come before us and pioneered and settled and even opened up presses of their own. But for those who are thinking, I want to do that, I want to write a story, or I want to write a book, what would be the first piece of advice that you would give them to help them get their personal stories out?
Start right now, this afternoon. Go in and put your pencil to the paper and write. Don't worry about it, and write the page. I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, when I retire, I'm going to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
Or my mother told me this story and I've always wanted to write it down. But the thing is, you have to do it. And it's a solitary thing. And there's a zillion ways to do it. It's easier than ever now to get it into print. There's a gazillion ways. and or at least save it for your grandchildren. Send it to talk to a museum about if they want what you've done. If it's fiction or fictionalized or poetry or something that a museum might not want, leave it where it can be found, and not just cleaned out with grandma's stuff at some point. And I think maybe the second thing would be to network with other authors. It is solitary, and if you can get on an online group or a real live group, a group at your library, and talk to other writers who are trying to do the same thing, it's really helpful when you're not all by yourself.
I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done and contributed in the region. I think that for a lot of authors, no matter how big or small your project is, when you put it out there to the world, you're putting out a piece of yourself, your heart, and to have somebody like you who's knowledgeable and good at what you do, but also very open and receptive, that's got to have made a pretty big difference for a lot of people's lives.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope it has.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's interview, but I know there is so much more to be talked about. And Nancy, you have so many good ideas. And so we're going to include some links and other resources so our viewers can take a step further. Maybe it's to start writing their book, or to maybe consider High Plains Press as the home for their perfect story. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We are honored to have you as a guest, Nancy. Thank you, Sylvia, for your wonderful contributions. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.